Hello, friends, and welcome. This is episode 18 of Syracuse Sports. My name is Brent Axe. Great to have you here on Syracuse Sports, which is presented by our friends at Krause Health. Find a career you'll love at Krause Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse athletics. Got a good one for you today. Don McPherson, the rightful owner of the 1987 Heisman Trophy. Get out of here with that Tim Brown stuff, but we didn't talk about that today, as much as I would love to spend an entire podcast talking about how Donnie McPherson's 1987 Heisman was basically stolen from him. But we'll save that for another time. Don was great. We talked quarterbacks. We talked Garrett Shrader. We told stories from he told the stories from his time as a Syracuse quarterback. But I love the insight that he had about the position, about Shrader as the quarterback for Syracuse, about to have a moment here with Clemson, North Carolina, Florida State coming up there. Shrader's moving up the ranks. As a matter of fact, he's chasing down Don McPherson for one statistic, as we'll get into here shortly. So Don had great insight on that. But what I love about doing these interviews is you kind of have one thing in mind and one thing leads to the next, and you kind of go places maybe you weren't expecting to go. You're going to hear some of that. We're going to talk transfer portal, NIL, what seems to be somewhat of a strained relationship between former Syracuse football players and the current administration in some ways. And Don does really important work with young men and what he calls aspirational masculinity. And it's important work, and I think you'll enjoy hearing the work he's doing there, the results that it's getting at this point, and the work he's got to continue to do in that department. So I'm going to get out of the way here and get Don McPherson in here. Let me remind you of this first, though. Saturday, after the Orange take on Clemson, Emily Leiker and I will do a live post-game show. We're going to do it about 6 o'clock or so after our post-game festivities are wrapped up at the JMA Wireless Dome. So if you follow us, Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube, if you follow our Facebook page, Syracuse Orange Football on Facebook, you'll get it live as it happens with your comments included in the podcast. If you do listen to it in podcast form on all the places you're listening and watching now, you will still get it on Saturday night. But if you want to join us live, come on by about 6 o'clock. Just look for a notification or hang out and check us out. And all those places will be streaming on Twitter as well. You can follow me there at Brent Axe Media. Without further ado, let's bring in the true winner of the 1987 Heisman Trophy, the great Don McPherson. Don McPherson. I'm going to start off with some numbers here, okay? Got my
all right.
Got my yellow pad here. Old school. Going old
official
school.
Document, yes.
Exactly. Official documents.
Official document.
5,812 yards. That is your passing yards number in Syracuse football history, which still ranks top 5 in the history of Syracuse quarterbacks. Garrett Shrader, current Syracuse quarterback, 5,057 yards. He is 755 yards away from you. So, of course, barring injury or anything like that, he's chasing you down. How does that feel, by the way, to hear you're still in the top 5?
I'm very surprised, actually, to be in the top. I would have thought that Garrett Shrader had passed me by now. It's funny. I was just saying this to somebody recently, is that the players are just better now. The game is better. The game is faster. It's more wide open. I mean, if you stood me next to Garrett Shrader, and I've met the young man a couple of times, he towers over me. So the game is better, and I'm surprised Garrett's still there. I'm hanging on top 5. I wish him well. So hopefully by the end of the season, I'll be number 6.
There you go. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about today, Don, amongst it's always great to talk to you, first of all, just other topics that we will get into. But take me back to when you were being recruited by Syracuse and what the conversation was like about quarterbacks, because you're still in the top 5, and the other 4 names on the list, I'll just go through it here: Donovan McNabb, Marvin Graves, Ryan Nassib, Eric Dungy, counting up to 1. Those are obviously all modern era guys. And, of course, the game has evolved and changed and there's much more emphasis on the passing game, which contributes to that. But all those names are basically starting with you and counting up here. So what was the quarterback conversation like when you were recruited to come to Syracuse?
Well, it was two things, Brent. If you keep in mind, I was just talking to someone about this yesterday about the history of Syracuse University and African American quarterbacks. We had a black quarterback, Wilma Sadat Singh, before the position was called quarterback. And the other school that people mention very often is Nebraska, but Nebraska had black quarterbacks who were running the option. J.C. Watts and all those guys who were running the wishbone, and even Taylor, who came up, around my age era. But at Syracuse, we were doing more power game. We were doing some option, but not a lot. And so the opportunity to come to Syracuse to be a true quarterback was on the table. It was you're going to be allowed to come here, and obviously we're going to run some option, use some of your athletic ability, but the opportunity to run some I formation, ISO, counter tray kind of stuff, and throwing the ball off of that was definitely the opportunity, and that was appealing to me because I wanted to be able to throw the football and be a real quarterback.
I was going to say, what kind of quarterback were you in high school? Was it a combination of the both, running and passing? Did you want to come in here and sling it? What was the mind frame there based on what you were doing in high school?
Yeah, I'll never forget, the guy that came up in high school before me, his name was John Chisholm in Long Island, West Hempstead. And he was a magician with the split back option veer, triple option veer that we stole from the University of Houston at the time. My high school coach went down there and studied Bill Yeoman's program. And so it was a lot of split back veer option, triple option, but I had a pretty good wide receiver. We had a good tight end. We threw the ball, and we threw the ball a lot in high school. So I got a chance to do both. And that was the appeal. I wasn't a true passer. I never had, it's funny, I just did an interview with a sports writer in Philadelphia because I never had a true quarterback coach until I got to the NFL. And Doug Scoville was my coach, who was a longtime BYU guy, and Philadelphia brought him in to coach Randall Cunningham. In fact, I got the benefit of having him as a coach. But when I got here, Bill Maxwell was my quarterback coach for most of my years, and he wasn't a true quarterback coach. He's more of an offensive coordinator kind of guy. So I learned as we went. And then when George DeLeon came in, we just kind of opened up this crazy offense. It predated the spread, but we were doing everything the spread is trying to do today.
So we've evolved to what the passing game is today, and I feel like Garrett Shrader is just like, if you're going to construct somebody in a lab,
yeah,
you're coming close to what Garrett is, because you brought it up a minute ago. He's a big player. He can bounce tackles. That Purdue game was kind of an extreme example because Purdue kind of gave him an easy pass to run all over the place. But the RPOs and the fakes, and when he gets an opportunity to take off and run, he is so hard to stop. But the passing game is evolving there too. So how have you seen Garrett kind of come into his own as a quarterback based on what these offenses have to be in college football today?
Yeah, and the offenses require a lot of quarterbacks, but what they require a lot of quarterbacks to do is to make fast decisions. And I think that's where if I had one sort of criticism of Garrett is that he's got to make fast decisions. And I think that's why he runs the ball so often out of the, a scramble situation, is because of his first reads that there he sort of hesitates a little bit. He's got to make that fast decision. When he makes that fast decision, you're not going to find a better arm, a stronger arm, a more accurate guy than when he makes that first decision. And that's what I liked what happened in the second half against Army, because I felt like they were giving him that ability to you don't have to read the whole field. Sometimes coaches can really complicate things, and even people who watch football from a distance can complicate things because there's a lot going on. I learned from a defensive line coach many years ago who said, listen, we've got 11 guys, that's 6 on one side, 5 on the other side. Pick the side where we're weakest and go attack it. And I think if Garrett Shrader does that, he is dangerous. And to your point, when he takes over and runs, I think even defenses, you can watch him on film, he is deceivingly fast and extraordinarily durable. And he's got good elusive moves. He runs the ball. He's really smart runner. And I think it's one of those innate things you can't teach. He's unlike any other quarterback, right, in my opinion, right now in college football, when he takes off and runs, because of not just his speed and his size, but he knows how to run. He's an elusive runner.
Now, I think it was this week. It was recently. I asked Dino Babers at a press conference how much basically liberty Garrett Shrader has to run the offense. And I don't know if you know this about football coaches, Don. They can be a little paranoid about revealing things. But I liked how Dino
They're
answered the
liars.
question.
They're liars, Brandon.
I liked how he answered the question, though. He's like, I'm not going to tell you that because I don't want to reveal it to my opponents. But what he did say, hitting on what you just said, is he's right more than he's wrong. Yeah. And I wonder if that's because of the continuity he has with Jason Beck. So let's go back. Remind me, in your time at Syracuse, how many different coaches did you have? Offensive coaches, you mentioned George DeLeon came in. And I want to ask that because I feel like one of the reasons we're seeing what we are from Garrett and could continue to see it the rest of the year is he finally has some continuity with Jason Beck. Now, Beck was not the OC last year, but those two know each other. They trust each other, right? But Garrett has had a lot of offensive coordinators through his career here and at Syracuse, and that can affect what you can do in terms of that decision-making we're talking about.
It can, but I'll tell you something that's more important than having a right guy over many years. Because I had Bill Maxwell, and then we brought in a guy for a year who was not a good guy, so I'm not going to mention his name and give him that dignity. And then George DeLeon came in. George DeLeon was a legend in the coaching ranks in college football. The first guy at the clinic, the last guy to leave. He was a workaholic. He just never stopped. He was a character, and he coached the O-line, and he was about 5'5" and 120 pounds soaking wet. And he coached the O-line, and he had the biggest booming voice, and he was a crazy man during practice. You could hear him. I was just laughing with one of the O-linemen. I saw him last week, Turnell Sims, and we were laughing at they would go, and he and Blake Bednarz, they would have pre-practice before the rest of us showed up for practice. The rest of us would be walking onto the field. These guys are already drenched, and there's DeLeon screaming at these guys and going crazy at them. I would go into offensive line meetings because we had a young O-line, and I would love to just listen to things DeLeon said. He's brilliant, and he had tremendous enthusiasm. And Brent, here's the difference. The first time I had to deal with George DeLeon in an official capacity, not talking about practice, he was our offense coordinator, but in a game when he was talking directly to me one-on-one, was on headset. The very first game I had him, I'm trying to think what game it was. It had been in '86, and he was as calm. He's calmer than I am talking to you right now. I mean, he was.
The crazy man is calm now.
The crazy man in game time, because what his philosophy was, you get him ready, and this was kind of Coach Mack's philosophy. You get him ready during the week, and then on Saturday you let him go play. And DeLeon was so calm on practice in that first time in headsets, and I was like, wow. And then I trusted everything he had to say. And I think that's the piece that you're talking about. When Garrett Shrader goes out there and he has Jason Beck in his ear, and he trusts what Coach Beck is seeing and telling him. He trusts what he's seeing and telling him during the game. And the coach tells you there's nothing better as an athlete than when a coach has been yelling at you and telling you to stay disciplined on something, and then you do it in the game and it works. Oh, you're like a puppy that just found, like you just found a guy with the treats, right? You're gonna follow that guy no matter where he goes, waiting for him to drop another crumb. And that was what DeLeon was for me. And I think that's the continuity you talked about with Jason Beck now having a little bit more authority now as the OC and the guy who can help make those decisions for Garrett. Now, those guys, I mean, here it is, what is it, Wednesday morning, whatever day it is, a week it is, those guys are sitting down right now with their feet up on the desk, looking at film and saying, hey, this is what they're going to try to do to you. Here's what they're going to try to do to you. Here's when they're going to try to do it. This is what it's going to look like. Expect it to come at this down and distance, this time of the game, this field position. And then all of a sudden, Garrett Shrader, that thing starts to happen on the field. Now the game slows down for him.
So, Don, you were on the '84 team, right?
Yes.
Syracuse beats Nebraska, and that was a huge moment, but it took a couple more years for that to really come to fruition for everything we saw in 1987. I feel like Garrett is on the cusp of having that moment. Now, last year, of course, Syracuse starts 6-0, and we were talking to you and a lot of your teammates because it was the first time since 1987 for a lot of things, and unfortunately, the second half of the season didn't pan out, partially due to injuries, including to Garrett Shrader, by the way, who got beat up in that Clemson game. He even said this week, Don, he's surprised he made it through that game, that he was so beat up, right? So I feel like he's on the cusp of his moment. And I want to talk about that in a second, but I want to go back to you. When did you have that moment as a quarterback, as maybe a big win, or you kind of knew this thing was coming together? Was it not until '87, or did you sense it before that?
I talk often about the loss to Rutgers in '86. Um, we should have beat Rutgers. We played them at home. The first drive, we go down the field, score a touchdown. Everyone's like, "Oh, Syracuse football is doing great." To your point. And then we end up losing. And Coach Mack that Saturday, or excuse me, that Sunday, told the coaches to stay home. He was gonna run film session on Sunday. The offense was supposed to show up at like 6 o'clock. Defense was there at 4 before us. And when we got there, they had already been in film study for 2 hours, and the projector was off, and Mac was just ripping them to shreds. And we can hear them from outside the room. And we're all waiting for our turn to go in. And Coach Mac went through that one series that we had. It was probably like a 7-play drive down the field, score a touchdown. And Mac ripped every single player to shreds. No one got out of the meeting unscathed. It turned out to be a 2.5-hour tongue lashing from the head coach. And that to me was the turning point going into '87, because what he talked about was how we prepared and how we did the little things right, and how each one of us was so dependent on the other to do their job. And prior to that, I don't know what we were thinking, to tell you the truth. I think we were a little kind of a program that didn't really have a kind of a sense, a North Star. And after that, there was no moment for me personally. The Louisville start in '85 was probably, obviously that was my first start, and coming off of 2 injuries in '83 and '84. And so that was probably a significant moment when I realized I could play college football. But that moment against Rutgers for me was when our team came together and said, we have to do different Monday through Friday if we're going to win on Saturday. And that extended to, we have to do different in January and February if we're going to do better in the fall.
So here we have Garrett on this moment here with Clemson coming in, North Carolina and Florida State to follow. Like this is the creme de la creme in the ACC. Clemson's not air quotes Clemson, right? When you look at Clemson, you see a 2-2 record. It kind of throws you off. But that, as Dino Baber said earlier this week, is still a championship level roster with all the talent. They gave Florida State everything they could handle last week. Florida State didn't even have the lead until they took the lead and won the game in overtime, right? So I think you got to take that into consideration. But I swear to God, Don, before I even knew I was going to talk to you this week, I told this story to my colleague, Emily Leiker, by the way. So I said, listen, I feel like Syracuse has got to have a McPherson more moment in this game, because you come into 1987, Penn State, that play just punched Penn State right in the nose, and they were done from the moment that game started, right? I feel like Syracuse has to do that against Clemson, right? They're good at stopping the run. They're a physical football team. Is there something that Beck has not shown, or has not shown a lot, that Clemson's just not going to see? You deliver that haymaker and you kind of go from there. I feel like he's just right on the cusp of something like that.
I don't think it's the haymaker. I think it's more of a pounding that because Clemson is, this Clemson team, obviously everyone now they're 2-2, and everyone's going to talk about the last time they've been this bad, and now they're out of the national championship hunt, and now the baton has been handed to Florida State. This is a Clemson team that Dabo Swinney and everyone thought was a top 20 team, a top 15 team, with not a lot of activity in the transfer portal. So with the guys that he recruited, he believed this was a good football team, which means they are a good football team. Talent-wise, top to bottom, they still have the talent. Right now, their biggest thing is, do they believe in themselves? And a big play, to your point about that Penn State moment, that was a big play, that was a big moment, and that was a shocker, and that's exactly what Penn State was afraid would happen, is that we would get the crowd in it. I remember the telecast because I've watched everything 20 years later, and Brent Axe saying Joe Paterno's got to get the crowd out of this before the game started. And the first play of the game, the crowd is like on the field, literally as loud as it could be. And so I don't think it's going to take that moment to break Clemson's spirit. What's going to take is if Syracuse gets the ball and they drive the length of the field, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plays, get first downs, show that you can get first downs, you can move the football methodically against Clemson. That's going to break their spirit more so, because that's just beating them down. right? There's a difference between having the big play and shocking them and then beating them down. And I think if they can beat down Clemson, get a couple 3-and-outs early, and get a sustained drive. I mean, look what Army did. Army came in and that first quarter. I mean, remember the first quarter of Western Michigan, I believe. The first half of Western Michigan was like 3.5 hours. It was ridiculous.
Right.
Penalties and everything else. It was a sloppily played game. Army comes in their first quarter. What'd they do? They went, I think they had the ball for like 9.5 minutes.
That's exactly. They said it's our ball and you can't have it. Yeah.
You can't have it. You're not getting it back. You can't beat us if you don't have the ball. And so I think Syracuse needs to do the same thing against Clemson and say, listen, if this is our place, you can't beat us unless you have the ball, and we're going to possess the football, get first downs, and keep your offense off the field.
How do you think Garrett handles not having Gatson, not having Isaiah Jones? I've liked what I've seen. I wonder what you've seen from other guys like Donovan Brown and Umari Hatcher, but no offense to who we've seen so far. This is Clemson. And I feel like if you're going to do what you just said, and if you're going to sustain a 4-quarter game against Clemson, who's really good at stopping the run, including a running quarterback, this could be the game. Maybe we start to see the absence of two of your top targets, particularly Gatson.
You know, I don't like saying this because it's not a fun thing. You know, college football and football period is a rough game. And so very often if you depend on, and I cringe with preseason superstar talk in college football because of the nature of the game. And if you went through the season thinking it's going to be Shrader to Gadsden and that's going to be the duo, and then you lose that and you go, oh snap, what do we have left? Like, what are we going to do next? Hey, this is time for one of those younger guys to step up, right? And Damian Alfredo, one of these other guys to step up to move that guy into that slot position. Here's the other thing about Gadsden. They list him as a tight end, which I never liked because I didn't think he was a true tight end. I'm a John Mackey guy, right?
There you go.
Block down for half the game, and every now and then we'll throw the ball to you, and you go roll over a linebacker or two. And so what ends up happening with Gadsden out is maybe they bring in a real tight end. Maybe they bring in a tight end who can help in pass protection if they're having troubles with pass pro. And then that frees up your receivers to, and this is where I think, again, I mentioned this a moment ago, simplify. You know, they did a lot of things with Gatson in that slot position. I do this because that means he can go just about anywhere like a fish, right? But simplify with your other younger receivers. Move somebody else in that slot position. Bring in a tight end. I think that this offense benefits from simplification. Benefits from Garrett Shrader having to make that read right now, let the ball go right now, and then scramble or run off of design. So I think sometimes when you lose your superstar skill guy, and I do this in quotes because I say this all the time, there's no such thing as the best player in college football. If that left tackle doesn't do his job, Garrett Shrader can't throw the ball in time. Nobody gets the ball downfield, right? LaQuinn Allen has no holes to run into, all those things. And so simplify, let Garrett Shrader see some reads quick and get rid of the ball quick. And that helps your wideouts as well, right? They're not trying to, they're running quick, crisp routes. And they know if the ball's not there on time, they become a blocker.
That's a great point. And I think Alford can play the slot. They have moved him there a little bit. He's such a big target. But he's definitely that first read at this point. He had a huge game last week. He's coming in very confident. So the offensive line too, Don, I wonder what you've seen there. I mean, I was fortunate to, it's fun to say this name again, David Wollabaugh Jr., who is at Syracuse. Unfortunately, he's out for the year with that injury. It feels like they're getting healthier. We'll see if Kalen Ellis and Joe Moore are back in this game coming up. They've been kind of iffy, maybe coulda, shoulda, woulda. We'll see if they're back in there. But when you have a guy like Shrader who can extend plays, even Dabo Swinney was saying it this week, that extra second, you know this as well as anybody, that extra second, if you either have to take off and run or just run to extend the play, it feels like he still has that, even with the offensive line still. Maybe it's still kind of trying to find itself. They had to replace 3 starters coming into this year, and that's a process.
Yeah. There's two things about that. I think, Brent, when you're talking, one is there's no other position in all sports where the sole job is to protect other players. And O-lineman is special. And I have a special place. Obviously, as a quarterback, I have a special place for O-lineman, but I think they're the smartest guys on the field. And they're the only group that all five have to work together.
Right.
They have to work as a unit. That's why George DeLeon was so masterful as an O-line coach, because he taught those guys how to work as a unit. So when you had injuries on the O-line, that hurts that continuity, that hurts the communication. Some of the communication that guys just know, they don't even have to talk to each other. They've been next to each other all day long, all week long, or all month long, however long they could keep a unit healthy and together, so they work together well. They tag off of each other really well. So that's the first thing I think about when I think of O-line. The other thing you mentioned, reminded me immediately as you were talking about that extra second that Garrett Shrader may give an O-line because he could run. I immediately thought of the relationship between Randall Cunningham and Chris Carter. And Randall would take off and run. Randall's first look very often Keith Jackson was my rookie year. Keith Jackson had 71 catches as a tight end. It was just ridiculous because Randall would give to him. Like I said, he was that first read, and Chris wanted the ball. And if Randall's first read wasn't there, very often he would take off when he was a younger quarterback. And Chris wanted the ball. So because Randall was taking off and running earlier than probably he should have at times, instead of going to 14 yards in his route, Chris would go to 12 or he'd go to 10 because he wanted to be open sooner. He wanted the opportunity to get the ball sooner. Yeah. And so Chris was breaking off his routes. And I remember in film study, literally say, Chris, why are you breaking off here? He goes, I want the ball, homeboy. Throw me the ball. I'm here now. Right? and as Randall matured and as the offense matured, all of a sudden now Chris is getting to his depth. Now the separation between Chris and the relationship with Chris and the running back coming out of the backfield was better distributed into the secondary. And so sometimes what a running quarterback can do is it can make your skills, your position a little bit lazy because you don't have to be as good. You can get away with, and I was guilty of this as a quarterback. There were times when I knew I didn't have to worry about the O-line because I was sprinting out and I was going to just do it on my own because I know I could. And that doesn't help a team. And so, as I said, there's no such thing as a single best player in college football or any football game because it does require the team. So when you said that about the O-line, it's true. They can get away with things because Garrett's going to give them that extra second. But at the end of the day, you want them to be sound fundamentally, and that means they have to do their job no matter how much skill Garrett Shrader has as a runner.
You brought up Randall Cunningham. I've got to tell a real quick Randall Cunningham story. I was there.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a Randall Cunningham story, right? I'm sure you got a million of them. But Bills-Eagles, I want to say it's 1990 or 91.
Yeah.
And Bruce Smith comes around the edge.
Yes.
Greatest pass rusher arguably in the history of football. I don't know if you know the play I'm talking about.
I know exactly the play you're talking about. In the end zone.
Oh, you know.
Yeah,
you know.
Randall ducks him.
Bruce Smith was literally on his back.
Yep.
Randall ducks him, and then I can't remember who the receiver was, but he's all alone at the 50-yard line.
Garrett.
And all of a sudden you just see this ball floating in midair, and he's all alone, and it was like a 95-yard touchdown. I will never forget that play as long as I live.
And that was Randall would do stuff like that on a regular basis, and he was one of the most. I was behind him. I was a backup quarterback to him. He was on the front cover of Sports Illustrated as the ultimate weapon. How demoralizing it is to be a backup to the ultimate weapon. But he was incredible. He would do things like that all the time. He was an incredible athlete.
Unbelievable. A couple other things, Don, while I got you here, kind of zooming out a little bit here. I wonder what you think about, we just saw some announcements recently, Syracuse. I mean, you drive by the Lally complex right now, you see a lot of cranes, you see a lot of dirt, you see a lot of construction equipment. They're getting ready for the next facility coming in 2025. And it kind of feels like, Syracuse is playing catch up a little bit here in terms of their peers in the ACC, but at least they're doing it. What have you heard and seen, and how encouraged are you to see that Syracuse has got some shovels in the ground and doing some things facilities-wise here?
You just mentioned something that I hadn't really thought of in terms of facilities and the catch-up. 20 years ago, it was the arms race in facilities, and you saw people putting up, all the new indoor facilities, the practice facilities, and all those different things that people are doing. And I've been in some other places like Texas and other places in Alabama, and their facilities are just off the chart in all the sort of the all the perks and all the bells and whistles. Nowadays, the game is unfortunately is NIL, and I think NIL is also scary because We're just in the infancy stages of it. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of other things in terms of antitrust stuff and some lawsuits from players to players. And I mean, I just think that the NIL landscape is going to be really, really messy before it makes sense. And yet that's the game right now. And so, why is it a player choose a particular school? Might not be facilities anymore. Might not be, it may be what kind of NIL relationships, what kind of NIL structure. And in that regard, I having conversations with John Wildhack, the athletics director, he's optimistic and excited about the NIL path that they're going down. I know they've got some new relationships on campus, and that's going to be the difference maker. Young kids are going to want to see that the school's not sitting on its hands when it comes to NIL, and they're going to at least create an environment, because I think this is the thing. What people don't really understand is the school really isn't supposed to be involved in NIL. Otherwise, it's
Right.
not an individual name, image, or likeness. And so there's this really tricky balance that's happening right now where the school has to make moves that provide opportunities for student athletes to go make some money in the NIL market. But the school really can't facilitate that. And so I think that's where I think that there's a lot of trickiness to it. Where again, I guess I should take that back. I think the school can facilitate it, but not actually make the deals. And so there's a lot to be done. I think that John Wildhack is doing a great job of trying to get Syracuse in the right position.
It's funny because Dino brought that up this week. I asked him about the facilities, and what you said there about NIL and facilities, it's almost backwards, right? And here's what I mean by that. In the NIL game, you can get one Carmelo Anthony type player and you are set, right? That's your team. It's a little more complicated in football. Even if you land the big time quarterback, you still need, as you said, the team around him. The basketball team here has got the facilities, which Dino was talking about this week. Like when he finally wandered over into the Mello Center about a year after he took over, he just couldn't believe what he was seeing. And now he's finally going to get that. The football team, I still think, Don, in this day and age, even with NIL, still needs the facilities. You still need to wow with the weight room and just all the modern amenities that kind of, get the kids bug-eyed when they're coming here on their official visits and their unofficial visits. So it's almost like the opposite is going back and forth here, and now at least it'll even out in that department.
You bring up another point about facilities that I think is, once again, it's not just the wow factor when you walk into a building. As I said, I've been in some places that there's a lot of wow factor in some buildings. But at the end of a year, does the place feel like home? And the reason I say that is, again, I don't know what those basketball guys do. They go over there and dribble a ball and shoot, and there's only a few of them. I don't know what their lifestyles are like. But football guys, I was just saying this to some students last night. I never saw campus after noon during the academic year. Forget about just during the season. I never saw campus. I was in Manley Fieldhouse, now the Lally Center, all day long. That place had to feel like home. And here's where I say that the transfer portal is a bigger problem than NIL. NIL is going to work itself out. And like I said, I think there's a lot more to come with NIL. But the transfer portal, how do you keep guys home? How do you get guys and keep them there? If you have, and I said this, I had this conversation with Dino a couple of years ago about how to recruit a kid who came to you through the transfer portal. And how do you not recruit a kid? How do you coach a kid? How do you coach a team that has, half the team didn't start here, and they're new, and they're replacing maybe a guy that you were buddies with, that you came up with, that you said, I remember my high school roommate, my college roommate for 4 years, we met in high school. Walt Mosley from Ellenville, New York. We said, hey, we're going to go to Syracuse and we're going to be a part of that backfield for the next 4 years. Well, all of a sudden, Walt leaves or I leave, and all of a sudden, a different guy's there. I said, man, you're not the guy that I met in high school. And the continuity of it, and that there's another whole other issue about graduation and education when it comes to transfer that concerns me. But I think it's really hard in this day and age to get that team continuity with transfer. And I believe that's why I believe Dabo Swinney does not jump into that portal, because he believes, again, facilities, but he also believes in his culture. He has a very strong sense of his culture, and bringing guys in and out of it is hard to maintain that sort of cultural identity.
Don, where would you put it here in terms of, I thought of this because you mentioned talking to Dino, right? How would you characterize the involvement of alumni, football alumni, what that kind of, for lack of a better term, that the kind of union is like, what your feedback is for the current program. Depending on what that is, there's been some donations that players have made to the new complex, and that's great. But just in general, do you feel like you have a voice in what goes on with
No,
Syracuse now?
no, and I think that's always been, for however you want to look at it, it's always sort of been sort of the MO at Syracuse. Former players don't have a big voice. I know there's a bunch of guys who live here who don't feel connected to the program, and that's unfortunate. And however, that doesn't mean that we're not together. There was about 25, 30 guys, actually maybe more than that, 40, 50 guys who showed up and got together the night before, 2 nights before, and the night before. Coach Ben was put into the Ring of Honor. And so and if you saw that field, a bunch of guys, they were still there. The loyalty is there. Generationally, my generation, I'm 58 years old. My generation, the guys who are just starting to get into that stage in life where they can give and they can feel like they can be a part of it. Lally is just a generation and a half, ahead of me. So we're getting into that place where we feel like we can have more of a presence. And I hope that the NIL generation or era will help foster some of that reaching out to guys who are recently graduated or guys like me who are 30 years out, to get them more involved, because we really haven't been. And it's kind of like you could say this is a more recent thing, but it's always kind of been the history at Syracuse that we haven't really reached out a lot to our alums.
That's too bad. And I think people would like to see you guys more involved. It's one thing to be at games and have a presence, like you said, get back together with your teammates. But I feel like I could give a lot of examples here, but I feel like other schools, that connection is more prevalent, not just in what they do to contribute money and contribute things that we physically see, like the Lally complex, but just the spirit, I guess, for lack of a better term. So maybe the connection's not there with the university, but do you still feel like you have a voice in reaching out to the current players, maybe in a way, or does that have to improve as well?
Well, you know what? I think that's up to the head coach, to be honest. I think a lot of things, there are times when I've been down in Lally or Manly, and I don't go poking my nose around the football wing. That's up to the head coach about who he wants around his program, and I think that's a really important thing to maintain his program. And so I've had some connection with some of the guys. I did a podcast with the Mob last year, or a couple of years ago. Well, last year, and got to know a couple of those guys. And you see them around campus. I'm around campus a lot. I was on campus last night, and so you see them around a little bit. You see them down in the alley, but unfortunately, there are other guys who live here in town, and some guys even work in and around campus who don't have that kind of connection. And I would love to see it, because I think at the end of the day, you're right about the brotherhood and the family. I see guys. I saw Dave Warner a couple weeks ago. He came up. I guess it was the Western Michigan game, and I saw him from like 100 yards away, and I knew who he was just because of his body type. Right? And I said, "Hey, Pop." He's like, "How'd you know it was me?" I'm like, "Because your body hasn't changed since you were, I was in high
You
school."
spot him right away. That's great.
Right. And to see those guys like him and Bill Hurley and those guys, I love that connection. I love the connection to the quarterbacks who came before me. And anytime I get a chance to see Todd Norley and those guys I played with Mike Kamenz and those guys I played with, it's always great to be a part of that. And that's where the giving comes from. That's where the support for the lifelong support of the program comes from.
By the way, I should shout out, I don't know why this name just popped in my head. He followed you, Todd Philcox. We got to get him in that conversation.
Yeah, his birthday was yesterday.
Oh, happy birthday, Todd. There you go.
Birthday, Todd. Yeah.
Well, by the way, had a pretty stellar NFL career.
Oh, yeah.
Which people forget.
Yeah, he was. And talk about Todd, like that program, because of the way DeLeon coached it, Todd stepped right in. He had as good a year as I did. I'm pretty sure statistically the next year coming in, he put up some great numbers, and he had Rob Moore and some great backs. He still had Drummond and Darrell Johnson in that backfield. Phil Cox had a 1 year starting role and really did a great job.
Don, before I let you go, I always like to check in with you and something. It's amazing what you're out there doing just on a day to day basis, and it's aspirational masculinity and how you go and you talk to football teams and athletes and not just athletes, by the way.
Yeah.
I saw on your social media talking to one of the SU fraternities in
Yes.
recent months, right? So tell us about your mission there and what you're doing and how it's going.
So, Brent, I've been in the space of doing work around men's violence against women, sexual and domestic violence prevention for nearly 30 years. When I retired from football in 1994, and the work I've always done was always about engaging men to prevent violence against women. And as I say more recently, I've been doing the work that women and survivors of violence have asked men to do. I haven't been doing the work that our boys need. And what I mean by that is that we've been talking about masculinity to boys, but not about their whole masculinity. We've been talking about the ways in which boys' behavior or men's behavior hurts women. We haven't been talking about what do we want for boys. We haven't been talking about it, and that's why I use aspirational. What do I want for them, so that they're living? I'm not one for sort of like cheeky acronyms, but I'm using this one because I think it's accurate. Is I want them to live authentic, whole, and evolving lives, and evolving masculinity, and that's AWE. I want them to live in awe of themselves and the boys around them, and that awe is how do you live your authentic self? How do you live your whole self? And the evolving piece is I'm 58 years old and I'm still adjusting to what life is like for me right now, and it's very different than I expected. It's very different than even moving here to Syracuse and dealing with the things I'm dealing with in my personal life. I did not expect to be at this point in my life, and so I had to evolve and I have to continue to grow. And so the message that I'm delivering with this aspirational masculinity, I'm doing some work around New York State, contracted with one of the New York State agencies, and doing work in promoting this aspirational masculinity. How do we talk to men about what we want for them, not what we want them to do for others, but what we want for them to truly grow in their wholeness and their authentic selves?
It's a great message, and I'm wondering, there might be too many to pick from here, but is there a particular success story that sticks with you? Maybe you talk to somebody and they circle. Well, yeah, you're great. For those not watching, you got your hand up, right? So
Yes.
that's a great example. So tell me that story. Maybe I don't know, maybe a team or somebody you talked to who they circled back in life and said, "Hey, thanks for that message. It really affected me in this way."
I will tell you, since I've been talking about aspirational masculinity in the way that I have, I literally I was at Ithaca College a couple of weeks ago, and I had a couple of young men literally say to me, "You saved lives today,"
Wow.
because no one is talking to boys about this. And we've been telling them this is a generation of young men who've only heard masculinity referred to as being toxic. And I remind people that before we use toxic to talk about relationships or masculinity, we talked about waste. I watched the story today on News One about toxic waste in our water supply, in our aquifer. And so uh, when it comes to toxic waste, we want to separate that and remove it from society. And so this is a generation of boys who haven't heard it. So to that point, I was with a group of young men last night. It's called the Men of Color Initiative on campus at Syracuse. I was with about 22 young African-American men of color. And I heard young men, college men, talking about therapy, talking about who do they talk to when they really need to talk, and how they need to do that for each other as a brotherhood. And this was just a sort of a amorphous group of guys from various parts of campus, who were part of this club essentially. And I heard them talking about things that really mattered. And every time I'm in that happens, and it happens frequently, believe it or not, is that I think about the people who don't think that boys and men care about supporting each other in a loving way, care about talking about things that they were raised not to talk about, like feelings and how they feel about things, how they navigate emotions, how they navigate relationships. And we've been relatively silent on giving them the exact language. So when you ask me about success stories, almost every session I do now, you mentioned a fraternity. There was a fraternity on campus at Syracuse. The young men told me they have what they called cry night, where they actually literally would come together on certain nights and just talk about their stuff. And if someone cried, it was okay. And right, so they started calling it that. right? And I hope I'm not breaking their trust in saying that, but I won't say what fraternity it was. But these guys were really talking about how they support each other emotionally and psychologically, and I think we haven't done a good enough job of being very deliberate in that education with young men, and so that's the work that it just, sometimes I'm thrilled that I get a chance to experience it, and now trying to grow that message with young men.
That's incredible. Keep up the great work. And for those that don't know, Don wrote a book. You can check that out. Just look up Don on Amazon or any of the places you get your books, and you can check that out. And Don's social media, and you can see what he's up to and that important message that he's getting out there. And we thank you for getting the message out here today on Syracuse Sports. It was so great to catch up. Thanks for the time and sharing the stories and talking some ball with us. And, we'll do it again down the road here. But thanks so much for coming on with us today, my friend.
My pleasure, Brent. I appreciate it. And go Orange.
Our thanks again to Don McPherson for joining us here. Great stuff from him. And, hey, great stuff if you are a subscriber to this podcast. Apple, YouTube, Amazon, Spotify, wherever you subscribe. Thank you for that. That's the best way to get new episodes delivered right to you of Syracuse Sports. If you are an Apple subscriber, please leave us a review or review us any place you want. Leave some comments on YouTube. We love getting your feedback on the show. Speaking of feedback, don't forget to take advantage of our voicemail line. That's 315-552-1964 if you want to get in touch with the show, or on Twitter, or X, if you prefer, Brent Axe Media. You can email me, BAXE@syracuse.com as well. Thanks for hanging with us, friends. Just a reminder about our live Syracuse football postgame show following Syracuse and Clemson here on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and you will get it in podcast form a little bit later on if that's what you prefer. But if you want to participate in the conversation live, we'd love to have you on Saturday after the Orange take on Clemson. We want to thank Krause Health for sponsoring Syracuse Sports. Krause Health is the exclusive healthcare partner of SU Athletics. Thanks for being a part of Syracuse Sports. We'll talk to you next time, friends.